Good morning, everybody, and welcome to a Friday special of the Social Housing Roundtable. Lovely to have you with us on this Friday morning. Hope everyone is doing well, and by the time this recording goes out, who knows? Maybe England will be Euro champions, but we will see. I want to welcome everybody today for joining us. I appreciate this one was a relatively fast turnaround in terms of advertising the event. But I always like to try and get the voice of anybody who is going forward for the CIH Vice President. I think it's a really important role. I think some people have done some amazing work with it over the years. And I reached out to Julie. We had a brief conversation, and I really liked the campaign and what she was standing for this year. And as people who know me know that anybody who's doing some work around partnership working, trying to bring people together, really kind of sings on the same hymn sheet as myself. So it's lovely to have her with her today. To those who I've not met before, so my name is Matt Baird, and this is the Social Housing Roundtable. I've been running this now for over 3 years. We've done over 130 episodes, a lot of which are available on Spotify and YouTube to watch back recordings of. Day to day, I am a recruiter. I've been recruiting in social housing for 11 and a half years, and I'm co-chair of the board for Spring Housing in Birmingham. But the idea behind the Social Housing Roundtable was to bring people together each and every week, usually on a Tuesday at 11 a.m. to discuss key themes in housing, and we've had hundreds of different discussions, some amazing insight. But what's really come through, particularly over the course of this year, has been the Times culture and accountability. And when I've talked to Julie, those are ones that really resonated with her and her campaign as well. So I'm delighted to welcome Julie to the table this morning. I'm going to pass over there to introduce today's topic, discuss a little bit about why that's also the theme of her presidential campaign, but more importantly, why it's such an important piece for social housing in general. And then we will have plenty of time for a more open discussion, forum thoughts, and questions. So I encourage you all to either put them in the chat whilst Julie is saying her introduction, or alternatively, raise hand and come in as soon as you like after that. So Julie, without further ado, over to you.
Thank you very much, Matt. So I am Julie Haydon. I'm the Director for Corporate Services at Wolverhampton Homes. We manage around about 21,000 properties on behalf of the City Council across Wolverhampton. We've got a very kind of diverse customer base in Wolves. It's very rich in terms of its culture, but it's also on the kind of the one of the most deprived areas across the UK. So we have some challenge as well in terms of employment, particularly with 18 to 24 youth and employment. And we've done a lot in Wolverhampton Homes to support that on behalf of the City Council. So I came into housing. I'm a relatively new girl on the block in terms of housing, I guess. I joined Wolverhampton Homes around about 6 years ago. I guess what's interesting, and when Matt and I were talking before I came, before I agreed to come on, we were really talking about kind of the types of roles that we've had. And when I look back, I think for the majority of my career, probably other than when I was consulting for a while, it's been very much about supporting people. And I think when I looked at social housing and, my kind of reason for going forward, I think for me, I very much found my home in social housing, and that's such a great feeling. From an organisational point of view, I have some amazing colleagues that I work with, and we have some great customers across the city who are very collaborative in terms of that kind of co-creation, but also around customer focus, customer engagement. So it's really important for us. So I head up corporate services, which kind of the name is on the tin, I guess. Very much the background. What do we call? We call it the Cinderella service sometimes, because we squirrel away in the background to support the front line, and responsible for things like learning and development, HR, governance, ICT, systems development, some of the apprenticeship work that's going on. So very varied. But one thing that I think has been constant for me is that I am so proud, I guess, to work for Wolverhampton Homes. We have a great company. We've done a lot of work over the last couple of years in terms of moving the organisation forward and thinking about how we can do things differently. So we did some kind of disruption in some areas to really kind of break the tradition, I guess. And part of that was about getting the organisation to work better together. So breaking down some of those silos. And I think probably my my kind of manifesto and my reason for wanting to sort of go into the vice president role was thinking about that collaborative approach, probably on a bigger scale. Is that okay, Matt?
That's absolutely wonderful. And I know when we were chatting before, it was around, I guess, that partnership working and why you felt it was so important, really. I know we've had Walsall Housing Group and others who've come on before talk around the amazing work actually goes on in the Black Country and in Birmingham and the collaborative piece. So I guess, why was the theme of collaborative working? Where does that come from, and what is really happening with Wolverhampton Homes and what you're doing at the moment?
Okay, we're lucky enough, as you said, Matt, in the West Midlands, we have been lucky enough to have a model that has been worked through in Walsall Housing Group and Walsall Council, and then across the health provision and social services. So we've got something, I guess, to build upon. One of the things that we looked at recently was a pilot scheme for something called See It, Report It. And what we wanted to do was encourage anyone going into any customer's house to report anything they saw or felt wasn't quite right. And actually that pilot has kind of spread across Wolverhampton Homes, the City Council, into the NHS, across to social services, thinking about adults and children. And when we were doing that, I think what's been kind of key for me is really, how can we kind of work relentlessly, I guess, to ensure that we build this integrated model. So treating housing as a central pillar in the community, in terms of people's well-being, their education, generally how they get on in life. Housing itself is a pivotal role to that. And when you think about kind of some of the wider determinants, I guess, in relation to social care, education, employment opportunities, healthcare, we can help and support as housing some of those kind of resilient communities. And I guess what we're all aiming for, and certainly from a housing, is that we have housing residents and communities that really can thrive kind of both within their homes but beyond that as well. And one example that's been a real success, our head of organisation development, Sarah Butcher, and the team in our learning and development team have developed a couple of programmes where we support young people in the city. So the council had a priority, which was around the 18 to 24 youth unemployment. And we were very passionate about that. So we agreed to do some work around it. We've got an amazing apprenticeship programme. And just yesterday, we were in the interview process for that. So we had 467 applicants for 4 apprenticeship posts. But what we have been able to do is link with our strategic construction partners and with some of our suppliers to take some of those apprentices that we can't take here. What we've also developed is something called the REACH programme. So this encourages young people, although we have had one 30-year-old, I think, but encourages young people to spend 6 weeks with us. They have some time in one of the service areas, and then they also have time with the learning and development team. So they look at how they interview, what a process looks like, how they complete a CV. But the really great thing about that is that a lot of these young people that we support are residents or tenants of Wolverhampton Homes. So actually what they're doing is going back into the homes and talking to parents and grandparents and aunties and uncles and actually helping to spread the word that way. And for me, that kind of collaboration and that wider area really helps us, I think, to kind of act almost as a unifying force, if you like, between housing associations, local authorities, whether it's an ALMO or other managing agents, and really think about those synergies that we can create and develop that will amplify almost a more collective impact. So that's kind of where it come from.
And I mean, I know we've talked an awful lot about partnership working and it's important, and sometimes getting, I think we've talked before about building kind of trust as well. And so when you can get proper resident engagement in a way that you're doing it, you'll find that trust and relationships with tenants involved tenfold, because customers genuinely feel like they have a voice at the table.
Yeah.
I guess going even further than that, why do you think that for so long housing, and this is more generally as a whole sector, has struggled with this partnership working, has struggled to kind of, because we've been very siloed, both as housing associations themselves, but then housing and health and housing and education. It's been silent, and yet we have yearly conferences and we have yearly events, and yet we still struggle a bit in that space. Just from your experience, where do you think that's, I guess, been built from? Why do you think it's still going on?
It's an interesting question, isn't it, Matt? And each of the candidates had an interview with Liam at CIH. And one of the questions he asked, interestingly, was, if you were Prime Minister, what would be the first thing that you would do to fix the housing crisis? Which I think, like, when you think about housing, and like when I think back, so I grew up in social housing with my parents and my sisters. And I can remember my dad, up until the day he passed away, he was so proud of this place that, we called home, and still now, even though my mum and dad have passed away, I still call that place home. It's somebody else is in there now, but that's what it is. And I think for me, it's really about getting housing on the agenda, and I don't think it's been on the agenda. It has to be. It has to be something that is talked about, experienced. And I think even though it had some mention, I guess, in the manifesto, it's kind of not been a hot topic. And actually, when you think, kind of years ago when the Addison Act and kind of what social housing was all about, I'm not sure if it's kind of lost its way somewhere along the line. But I think what we do see is a real kind of stigmatism about being in social housing that I don't remember when I was younger. Now, that's not to say adults did or didn't, but I don't remember that, from my experience. And I think when I was kind of looking at some of the stats and the information, we've got somewhere around 17% of the population, so a fifth of the population, who rent from local authorities. And that's a massive amount of people, and that's a worry for them every day. I talked to Matt a bit about some work that we'd done in Wolverhampton homes, where we'd looked at data and insight, because one of the things as an organisation we are working towards is being a data-driven organisation. So where we have people maybe that will say, oh, I've lived in Wolverhampton for 70 years. I know what these customers want, and it's this. And I'm saying, how do you know that? Have you lived or experienced what that customer is experiencing? Well, no, but no, it's about data, and it's about the use of data and how we work with it. And one of those for me was this kind of fifth of the country who rent from local authorities. It's a worry for those people every day. And we had some of the insight that came back through this piece of segmentation survey said that around about 30% of our customer base in Wolverhampton live on £10,000 a year or less. I think, oh, wow, like how does that happen? How can that happen? And I think If we think about the relationships, then I think there needs to be a stronger kind of recognition that there's an important relationship between kind of housing supply, social security, health, because having a good and a safe home is one of the amazing pillars, I guess, that you have. And that's what I remember, you know, from my time in Quarry Rise in Tividale. And I'm not sure we've got that. And I think from a CIH perspective, it's about how we can really drive that collaboration, because we've got a whole raft of people that go into people's homes. But when you think about some of the work that, say, social services do, so the bar for getting support from social housing has risen. So they don't go out to certain kind of concerns that are raised. Who is it that goes in the door? Well, generally it's housing professionals. Now, a lot of housing professionals won't have signed up to be a social worker, but I don't think there's anyone that would want to walk away from a person who is in need or needs some support or needs signposting just because, say, they weren't a social worker. And I think there's an element of that now within the housing sector, where we are becoming so much more than, say, our job descriptions say. But I think if there was a more joined up approach, we would have that ability to signpost to health, to signpost to social services. So that for me was kind of one of the areas that is kind of really key, I guess, in, you know, my thought process.
Thank you. I mean, if anyone would like to come in or raise questions or thoughts or share ideas or their own experiences, please do. We want this to be as open a collaboration as possible. And if you wish to just put something in the chat, you're welcome. If you wish to raise a hand and come in, just use the reactions tab at the bottom of the screen. I'll bring you in quite comfortably. We'd love to hear from you. I think we discussed this, Julie. You and I have had a chat around the changing role of the housing officer and the changing role, I guess, of frontline services. It's something which I know you're trying to do all you can over at Wolverhampton Homes to encompass, but it's a real challenging area when social services are massively underfunded, other support services have been massively underfunded, and yet we attract people to the housing space. People are attracted to the job of social housing because they care and want to help. So
Yeah.
asking someone to go in and help a bit, but if they are struggling in other areas, to just leave them be because that isn't your job,
Yeah.
isn't going to work. And yet there's only so much funding, there's only so much money we can pay housing officers.
Yeah.
There's only so much time that a housing officer has in their week to deal with a caseload or patch or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
How is, you know, within your role at Wolverhampton Homes, how are you managing that at the moment in terms of supporting residents whilst also trying to support staff?
The staff. We've got so within the business, we've been working on what we called our future transformation. And this was really thinking about how we can reimagine or redesign services. One of the things that, again, had come from the data we collected is that people within Wolverhampton, we'd had about 97%, I think it was, who had access to mobile, and 80-something% that got broadband. So we knew from that data we could do much more with digital. And some of the things that we've been looking at is to try and, I guess, make life easier for tenants, but also encourage tenants where they are capable of doing so, using those kind of nudge techniques, if you like, to kind of push them towards digital. So we developed and launched a customer app in November last year. So our systems development team, under the management of Sam Dugmore and Nikki, who is our head of service, developed with NEC this app, and actually it's taken off. So we've got a lot more of the city population in terms of tenants now using a customer app. So what we've had to do to be able to encourage that and drive it is to make sure all staff are aware of it, and to make sure that when customers call in through the usual channels, we can have the conversation that says, do you know we've got an app? Is it something you can use? Okay, if you can't, let me show you how to. So it's about that kind of nudge techniques in doing that. One of the other things that we have, I guess, never took our foot off the pedal with is staff development. And staff development is a real key element to how the organisation functions now, but how we prepare ourselves for the future and what that looks like. So each of our managers, anyone with line management experience, we'd put through an ILM course, the Institute of Leadership and Management. We looked at the people management processes, so things like the usual kind of formal process, disciplinary, grievance, those kind of things, managing absence. And Sarah Butcher, head of OD, has driven that programme for the last kind of 4 years. And I would say now that service is second to none. But what it enables us to do is to make sure that staff are skilled and competent in what they need to be, and that they are comfortable in being able to kind of deal with things that may not be their responsibility to deal with. So, but it's important to be able to signpost or kind of move that. One of the other areas that Sarah's responsible for is around our community engagement and development. So we've got a team in community development that will go out to customers to help them raise their awareness. So where we've been doing some work around complaints and the responses for the complaints handling code, we're actually looking at going out to residents as well to say, do you understand what this is? Is there, are you comfortable in how you can raise a complaint? Can we give you any other kind of support to be able to do that? And I think it's having that kind of collaborative approach across staff and customers to make sure that they're all in a position to be able to kind of do what they need to do.
Been interesting, and I can see some of the points actually that are coming through the chat there. The two biggest issues that have come through. So from the Dean, who said the issue for me is that the housing sector do not work with their residents on a whole. There's no trust on the resident side. And Rachel said that they believe their biggest problem is getting social services to pick up cases and work with individuals. The bar for referrals has got so high in my area, someone has to almost be the highest need before they'll pick up cases.
Yeah.
Sometimes we also have to take legal action to force the hand of social services to get the supports of tenants. And I mean, focusing, I guess, first initially on the Dean's point there. So do not work with the residents on the whole. There's no trust. I don't think it's surprising that in the last couple of years, when residents have suddenly been given access to the ombudsman, we have seen complaints skyrocket, but be taken far more seriously than maybe we have before. I've said on the roundtable over the last couple of months, I've never recruited for as many complaints officers as I have in the last year. And more than that, I mean, the dispute resolution team at the Ombudsman has grown from about 26 people in 2022 to nearly 350. It is absolutely blown up.
Yeah.
When we talk about partnership working, I think one of the key things we also need to make sure we're emphasising in all of this is that it isn't just partners externally, it's internally in how our teams work together.
Yeah.
And it's internally in terms of how we collaborate as a sector to say, well, actually, so-and-so... There we go. So-and-so has joined us today. They've got a complaint about X. Cool, well, that's not being passed to that team, and they don't know anything about it, and then they don't know anything about it. Yeah. Is this something that you're seeing across the sector and with other clients you're speaking to? Because I know so much of what Wolverhampton Homes do is also collaborate with other partners across the Midlands.
Yeah. It is absolutely. So we've got some real good opportunities where we have one of our directors, Angela Barnes, who sits on some of the committees across in social health, and also we work, so some of the services we deliver in Wolverhampton Homes is around some of that support element, so domestic violence, home improvement agency, and we're lucky enough to be able to run those services on behalf of the council. So that for us is very joined up. I think certainly your point in relation to complaints is a key one. And I think if you look at the TSMs, I think we've all seen, haven't we, the fact that complaints and ASB appear very low in the percentages. And I think that's something to do with, are we asking the right questions, which I'm not sure we are, but also, are we clear in kind of how we're learning from complaints? So there's some of those things where we've had reports that have come in from the Housing Ombudsman where we've actually, before we've gone back out to anyone, we've contacted the Ombudsman to actually speak to them and talk to them. And that for us has been really, really positive, because one of the things that I'd said actually to Rick Blakeway when we were on an NFA forum was that because they've recruited to a high number of staff, a lot of those staff aren't housing professionals. So actually they're making recommendations and decisions without understanding the kind of the area we work in, the challenges we see in housing. And that for us has been really important. So the other thing that I think is key with the whole kind of complaints process is about having customers involved in that. So we set up our customer involvement panel last September, and we've got a group of about 10 customers that work on that. We also have the ability to bring in other groups of customers that want to do, I don't know, a 3-month piece of work on something, or they're happy just to have a look through a document. So we've utilised that, and complaints is going to be one of those areas that is utilised and challenged, I guess, through our customer involvement panel. So the outcomes from that panel go up to our committee and then up to board. And we also link across with the city's scrutiny panel. So we join in some of that up as well. The other thing, I think, just when you're thinking about kind of staff and making sure that they're in a position to be able to do as much as they can, is having something back at base where if there have been difficult decisions to be made, or they've had a difficult time with a customer who is struggling for whatever reason, that they've got the ability to kind of debrief that session. And that was something we found through the pandemic, actually, where because people were lone working anyway, or where they worked in pairs, whatever, then they didn't come back to the office and kind of do that debrief session. But that's also a really valuable time to learn, you know, what went well, what could be even better if. And that's something that our chief exec, Sean, very often says, you know, what went well with it, what could be even better if. And that's been a bit of a mantra that we've used with everything that we're working with. But I think your other bit of the question, Matt, and forgive me if I've missed any of it, was about departments and service areas working together. And this was something that we co-opted the support of an organisation called Disruptive Innovators Network. So if any of you know Ian Wright and Jenny Danson, although Jenny's gone off to do something else now, we worked with them for a while, and we've looked at our customer journeys, where the touch points are. So if you look at, say, the end-to-end void process, that spans across probably 4 or 5 different areas, and each of those service areas were keen to move it quickly, but they literally just moved it quickly to the next area. So what we've done is looked at those customer journeys to see where are the real touch points for customers, where does it impact the most, where are those kind of points of delight, and how can we remedy our process to better support the customers. And that's one of the things that from our kind of transformation program, the Our Future transformation program, we've pushed that into the organisation. And it's surprising, I think, because I think housing is very traditional, and we've got a lot of people with a lot of service and a lot of knowledge, and we don't want to lose that. But the world's very different to what it was 30 odd years ago, or, you know, 40, 50 years ago. And it's about trying to support people to see what the difference could make. And I think that's been part of our kind of the the way we've moved this forward is to say, do you know what, give it a go. It doesn't matter if it doesn't work, we'll come back, we'll review it. And that's something that I hope kind of goes through all of our staff groups now, is that it's okay to try something, because what has always been isn't working now. And I think we all know it isn't working. So it's about looking for other opportunities. And for me, I think this is where the CIH is really kind of instrumental in helping us as housing professionals to disrupt the status quo a little bit and to look for things that are different.
This episode of the Social Housing Roundtable is sponsored by Alerta Call. Alerta Call helps as many people as possible feel safe, connected and informed by combining ingenious technology and award-winning human contact. Alerta Call's digital engagement solution helps social landlords proactively know their customers and properties by putting a portable touchscreen in every home, offering a daily property check through the optional OK Each Day service, plus repairs reporting, tenant surveys and much more. They also provide Beyond Warden Calls, an easier, simpler and lower cost wireless warden call solution with video door entry, dispersed telecare and smoke alarms. Alerta Call works with over 60 housing providers across the UK to enhance two-way engagement between customers and landlords. In 2022, Alerta Call won the Queen's Award for Enterprise and Innovation, and in 2023 won Housing Supplier of the Year. I'm delighted to have them as our sponsor of the Social Housing Roundtable throughout 2024. I couldn't agree more. Steve, I'm going to bring you in, then we're going to a few points in the chat, but good to have you with us today.
Morning, Matt. Thanks very much for letting me attend and speak. I agree a lot with what Julia said, but I think there's a lot of pressure being put onto landlords. Sorry, I'm a tenant. I think there's a lot of pressure being put onto landlords for things that they are doing which are non-core. Since the cutbacks started around social services, landlords have added services to their portfolios, like employment advice, money coaching, things like that, which are not their core processes. Sorry, I could go on for hours about this, as Matt knows. I just wonder if the landlords are becoming the whipping boys for the government, because the Ombudsman has come in and said, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, you've got to look at TSMs. And now we've had all these non-core services coming in. If tenants start complaining about that as well, which, obviously they do, again, it's putting pressure. Now, there's only so much money landlords have got. They're on a fixed income, and that income is fixed by the government, what rents they can charge. Now, with the added pressures in their core, what landlords are there for, which is to provide good, healthy, energy-efficient homes, with EPCs, the added cost to improve it, the EPCs to sea level, the added cost of retrofitting properties, and all these other financial pressures. I just wonder that, where is it going to end? Because the government are cutting back on services that they are responsible for. That burden is now on the landlords, but they're not giving the financial support for landlords to do that. Now, do you think that, don't get me started on the Ombudsman, but do you think that in certain areas, the sector is getting over-regulated in areas which are non-core, which are not their responsibility, and will landlords gradually cut back on the services they provide to their tenants, which will have to be taken up somewhere? Otherwise, care in the community is all well and good, but that care in the community was saving the government money but that they are now putting that responsibility onto somebody where it's not their responsibility.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Nice, easy question for you there, Julie, in terms of yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Steve, thank you for your thoughts, and their thoughts that are echoed. Obviously, we hear that from many of our customers. There's an element, I guess, of from a landlord service, we often talk about the 3 R's as being kind of the core services, so repairs, relettings, and I think part of it comes down to, I mentioned earlier, and I'm not sure if I've mentioned it on this call, but for me, it's about having a housing minister that understands housing, and not only one who is kind of passionate about housing, but one who understands some of the lived experiences of our customers, but also understands some of the nuances of the housing providers, because a private housing provider versus an ALMO is very different. As an ALMO, we're not for profit, but we have to make sure that we are able to demonstrate best use of the money that we get from the HRA. I don't disagree in essence, Steve, with what you've said. I think there's certainly, these have been some of the questions that we are asking now with our colleagues at the City Council, is with a limited resource in terms of the HRA, what is it potentially that has to give? And that's a real hard question to ask. It's one question that I know the city will be talking to councillors about, because we can work, and we have worked as an ALMO connected to the local authority, to think about what we can do. So can we do more with less, I guess, or can we do more with a flat line in terms of the management fee that we get? One of the ways of doing that is to think about some of these things I mentioned earlier. So can we better use digital? Can we better use, I'll give you an example. So in terms of some of the digital and our customers going to digital, we've got a group of customers who have vulnerabilities, or actually haven't got the capability to use digital, but having a digital application now that most of our customers can use frees up some people in, say, the contact centre to actually support those people on a face-to-face basis. And I think that's one of the things that I guess I can speak about, because that's something that we've done. Do I think the government should put more money in? Yes. Do I think that should stop the right to buy? Yes. Wales and Scotland have done it. Why isn't, why can't that be the same for England? Can we look at the services joining up? And I think that's probably, Steve, where my passion, I guess, for doing things more collaboratively is to spread the numbers that we've got to go to those same tenants, because all of the residents of Wolverhampton are Wolverhampton Homes tenants. So we've already got health services, social services, whatever they might be, and they will have information and detail, and they may have gone in, and it may be that they can just spend 10 minutes with someone. And isolation was something that we picked up as quite a dramatic impact after kind of the pandemic. So whilst I don't disagree, Steve, I think there's some things that, unless I get appointed to Prime Minister, which, I'm all for giving things a go, I might not be able to do. But for me, having someone in housing that sits on the top table that, can really put forward the voice of the customer, the voice of the landlord. And I think one of your other points, Steve, just in terms of some of the regulation, we know we've got a 5th standard coming in April next year, which is around conduct and competence. And for me, in some cases, and I won't say in all cases, having a qualification in housing doesn't mean you're better on the front line with a customer. And I think those are some of the kind of challenges that we need to put forward. We kind of to support, I guess, in terms of, you know, the knowledge of the consumer standards, what the regulator of housing is responsible for. And I know there've been some changes again now just recently, since Labour got in last week, around the housing ombudsman role and the regulator role, because I think there's been a little bit of kind of push and shove across there. So we're working with that as well. But I think it's about people in the organisation and customers understanding that kind of framework that we work into. And that's something that we've done. As I mentioned earlier, we've created an e-learning package that we can push to our staff, but we can also serve the community with that same information. I don't think I've got an absolute answer, Steve. I wish I had. I've got some stuff that I wish we could change, and I think would change things for the better. But I think, you know, if you look at from a housing perspective, it almost needs to be part of a universal service, the same as health and social care is. And it isn't that at present. It's not viewed in the same way. But it really is a linchpin and a key linchpin for supporting people for good health, good social well-being, co-creation, collaboration, and essentially
really
about
interesting,
that,
isn't it?
you
That
know,
when you speak to
provision of a good quality, safe home for people to thrive in. But it needs to be part of the solution rather than just the solution.
I think it's interesting because when you speak to health providers, they know how important having a safe home is and housing do, but it isn't always police. But that's a whole nother area. Sorry,
It
Steve, I'll let
is,
you come back in.
Yeah, just one other point. Do you think that there is too much reliance these days on electronic contact? Now, I agree it's easier to report a repair or you know, pay your rent, things like that. I'm not arguing with that point. But if the sector becomes too reliant on electronic contact, then there is a danger. I mean, it's happened over the last few months where people's bodies have been found because they haven't contacted, you know, nobody, a horrible thing to say, nobody's missed them.
Yeah.
You know, because there isn't that personal contact.
No.
I mean, like you, I was born and brought up in a council house. We used to have the rent man come round once a week.
Yeah, I can remember that.
And you know, sometimes he'd come in for a cup of tea and chat with mum and dad.
Yeah.
But also he was there, and if there was anything wrong,
Mm-hmm.
he could spot it, and he could, you know, in conversation, how things going, blah blah blah, or he could look up at the gutter and see that it needs clearing.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, at the moment, if I speak to my landlord on the phone and they say, "Oh, how are you?" "Oh, I'm fine, thanks." I could be sitting here with 2 broken legs and a broken arm.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't know. And I could be the sort of person that doesn't want to make a fuss. So you're not going to say anything.
Yeah.
So that we're getting in a position where, yes, use electronic means for day-to-day things, but there's got to be that personal interaction, that face-to-face. Oh, hang on. How about housing officers or housing liaison officers, something like that? Wouldn't they?
It's interesting because Dave Skinner said in the chat there that, you know, Julie, you mentioned doing research on your app. Many housing providers are doing similar research and gaining insight beyond the TSMs through stuff like that.
Yeah.
Bringing this collective research and insight together would be a great catalyst for truly tenant-centered services improvements. But it goes like say, but then, as I guess to Steve's point, and actually a few points that have come in by the chat, you know, Nadine and I were kind of saying back and forth there that the problem is that housing, is there real trust between housing providers and their tenants? You know, and same Steve's point, how much honesty is there? Sharon said, you know, if we actually did what we said we would have done for years and years and kept customers informed on the process, even if there's nothing to tell them, still providing an update, that trust would be higher. And you know, Dean said that her landlord is a resident-led organisation, so we're involved in everything, right down to having 6 resident board members. And I think what's really interesting, and it ties in a bit to work with DIRN, and Rachel said there at Muir, if we haven't heard from a tenant for a year, we proactively go to visit them. Patch sizes are too big with ASB lettings and day-to-day. There's got to be that link between the two. There's got to be some tech, because we are now some landlords are particularly just so large, you can't afford a housing officer for every 200 to 300 services, and yet you need, as Steve has pointed out and others have pointed out, a true ability to build trust and credibility with your tenants. If you're going to get those true and honest answers and true feedback that you need in order to improve services. So I guess, how are you finding that balance yourselves? But also, do you think this is something the sector is still, I'm not saying failing or falling behind on, but struggling with, I guess probably is the right term.
Yeah. I think it's a really good point, Steve. For me, and from an organisational point of view, we will promote digital contact for those customers who are capable of using it. As I said, there are people that don't want to use it but can, and that's about helping them to be able to. But what's also important, as you've said, is that face-to-face contact. So we do have tenancy and leasehold officers. They are at the moment patch-based, but we are looking to do something a little bit different with that. So we're going to put them onto our planning board so that we can identify areas across the city that need support. So we've got some areas of the city where more tenancy officers will be appreciated, and we've got some areas of the city where they probably don't need to be in there every week. So that's one of the things that we're doing. They're certainly from a contact point of view. So we do have a contact process and policy that deems that we will go across the threshold at least once in every 12 months, but obviously we will look to do that more regularly. And part of that is about utilising all of our frontline services that go out into customers' homes, because it's not only the housing officer type role, it's the ASB officers, it's our repair staff. And one of the things that really helped us, Steve, was to, when we bought in the See It, Report It. So Siri, this is where everybody's phone goes off, isn't it? And where people do go into a property, and it's hard sometimes, isn't it? Because not everybody is welcoming, and not everybody wants us in there for various reasons, and they could be all sorts of things. So there is some work as well with tenants to be able to gain that access sometimes, because we do have tenants that won't give us access. But that's about having the ability, I guess, for anyone going into someone's home to have the trust. I guess we talked about this trust element, that that person is going in there for the reason of making sure there is a safe and secure home. Now, I've read, I've read reports where people have been found after 4.5 years, been lying dead under a pile of clothes. And I guess it comes a little bit to how much authority would someone have, say, they see a pile of clothes there, to unravel the pile of clothes, which I don't think we would, but we do have a responsibility to make sure someone knows about that. Now, that's where I think from a more joined up approach, you almost get, like if you join housing, social care, we're doubling the amount of people that could go into someone's home. And if those records and reports were shared across, we know that someone, even though it was a nurse or a district nurse or whatever that might be, had been across the threshold. And for me, that's where the importance of that collaborative working comes from. But I guess
you and I have discussed, haven't we, the case of, obviously, the famous, the most recent kind of massive case, I guess, was Peabody.
Yeah.
And actually, the amount of, you had gas engineers, you had people doing safety checks, you had fire service, you had the police, there were so many touch points that should have been there on that journey that weren't.
Yeah.
And I know when you and I spoke before, it was, when you get something like a tenant doesn't want to let you into their home or something like that, rather than immediately stigmatise or immediately going, God, they're a nightmare. It's, okay, well,
It's
why?
understanding why. What is
what
it?
have we done wrong
Yeah.
for you to not want us into
Yeah.
your home?
Yeah.
And how do we fix that collaboratively? I think it's something that stuck with me, because I think it's there is an ego, I think, sometimes amongst some housing providers. There is we are providing a home, people should be grateful for it kind of mindset that's unfortunately stuck for a long time. There's a lot of stigmatizing of tenants going, well, if it wasn't for us, they'd be on the street kind of mindset that drives me a little bit crazy, if I'm honest with you. The joy of being self-employed is I don't mind shouting about this, and I don't mind who I upset along the way, but it's that kind of mindset, I think, that has got us into these problems. And yet it's often, you know, we do whatever we can, kind of, you know, I'm Birmingham based, you're obviously over in Wolverhampton with Wolverhampton Homes. Sometimes you're dictated so much by London and what's happening there, and policies dictated with what's going on there, that actually you forget there's a lot of other parts of the city, the country, having just as many issues, trying different things, but the voice isn't always as loud, is it?
No, absolutely not. And it you know, it's such a key, you know, being able to speak to tenants and to understand, you know, what they want and need from us. And I guess, Steve, this is back to your point about the digital. So we will drive digital as much as we can, but never to the detriment of somebody that cannot use it or has a preference for another way of communicating. But it is, you can't argue with the fact that digital is a thing. But for me, it's about making sure it's not at the expense of anything else. It's about promoting another way of supporting people. And that's not to say that people who use digital don't want some face-to-face contact at some point. So we've worked with the city of Wolverhampton recently as well. And we've got some of the staff, some of the city council staff that go out to hubs in our communities. So we're joining up with them. So we all go, you know, we've got either tenancy and leaseholder officers, or we've got members of our community development team, our team, the fire safety team and ASB regularly to go to what we call our Let's Talk sessions. So, you know, customer, tenant, resident associations, those kind of things. And I think for me, it's about, you know, for every one of us, it's about playing our part. So I don't very often get to go out on the front line. However, when I parked at one of our offices a couple of weeks ago, Bill was coming down from one of the flats. Now, Bill's one of the guys that I met at one of the Let's Talk sessions, and I stopped and had a conversation with him. So I found out he was suffering from cancer. He'd just gone through some treatment. And as I walked away from him, it said, "Thanks for stopping and chatting." I think, oh God, you know, is it?
It's like human contact.
Yeah, it's just about us all doing our bit.
And where we're going into the last 5 minutes, I'm going to bring in Julian, and then there's a point from Adunni in the chat. But Julian, great to have you with us. Welcome to the roundtable.
Thank you. Yeah, I saw you on LinkedIn. So that's what got me in. I was just going to say that sitting here now in the office, we've got 94 tenants at Epsom Renewal Housing Association, and they're all over 65. So yeah, the digital sort of way of contacting them, although the odd, you know, a few don't mind, it's not really something we push a lot. But I just happen to be a housing association tenant as well, and my landlord, you know, I've got a lot of time for them, but they've got tens and tens of thousands of properties, one of the much larger ones. And I don't know if people agree, but I think perhaps it's a bit like other things in 2024. It's like a hybrid approach probably works. But so, for example, they just, without any notification, just stopped their customer services email address, just must have just deleted it, so it doesn't work. And then, and I think it's a bit like when you go on a chat bot, or when you know, go to Next or something on the internet. When you're dealing with the AI chatbot, it's a real pain, and you want to get onto to speak to a person. Yeah. So and housing, obviously, we're not dealing with ball bearings; it's people. So I think that if organizations, they have to, because they're so big, and they have to streamline and cost, and I totally get it, and customer call centers, but you can't have that system where it's all or nothing. So now I'm being pushed to the portal as a tenant, but I've got very specific query about service charges that I just happen to know because I'm weaponized because I work in the in the sector. So I do think that as much as I understand it's a large organization, that I couldn't do it myself, dealing with tens of thousands of tenants, and you do have to do it a different way. It's really important that you've still got an avenue for a tenant to get hold of a real person.
Yep.
If you look at the other end of the extreme, where, you know, my day job, I know, you know, nearly all the tenants, and we have our coffee and we talk to them and we just do everything. At the other extreme, if you're not getting into house for years, there has to be not necessarily a happy medium, but a happy minimum, where at least you're someone when they need you. So I like to think, you know, I hardly have any repairs and I don't need my landlord. But if I do, you know, you don't really want to sit on the phone for 20, 30 minutes. You don't want to have to sort of go through a whole rigmarole of going through a computer system or chatting with an artificial person.
I really, really agree. And actually, I've just written down that phrase, not a happy medium, but a happy minimum. And I really like that. I think that's a really interesting kind of mindset for us to have as a sector. And Denny's put in the chat, you know, we've touched on the important and under challenged issue of the size of some housing providers. Our sector seems to be resigned to the ethos that bigger is not necessarily better, but almost inevitable. And now we're thankfully moving back towards centering the voice, wants and needs of our residents. The question is who and to what end do supersized housing providers serve the residents, because purely commercial isn't enough. And Sam Dugmore's put there, using digital solutions to tailor and improve the digital offer for those who truly wish to engage with an organisation through that method. Digital should be a complementary service and shouldn't replace or remove any other methods of communication and customer service. And where we've got kind of last couple of minutes here, Julie, I know one of the questions we were going to talk about was kind of your inspiration for going towards and going for the CIH vice presidency position, but just touching on those points from Julian, from Denny, from others in the chat today, from Esther, who's just pointed out there, how are you feeling, I guess, about the sector at the moment and the role of the CIH? But more importantly, you know, how do we reach that happy minimum, which is a term I'm definitely going to steal for a while, Julian. So thank you for it.
I am very positive about the social housing sector. I have a real feel that we can kind of strengthen the voice, not only of social housing residents, but also of social housing staff. And if we look at some of those, you know, kind of where does the investment need to be? And the point that Sam has put forward, Samuel Dugmore. So Sam is actually our systems development manager who was responsible for the development and the introduction of the customer app. And I guess, Julian, back to your point, is that we will push digital, but not to the detriment of people that really need to talk to us. And it's about using the services that we have in their entirety. So it's not just a team of, say, 20 tenancy officers. It's more about whoever goes into a property, into someone's home and sees something. And we've had a real success, as I said earlier, with our See It, Report It pilot. So we've had a lot of our trades operatives that were a little bit concerned about, and what do they call it, kind of telling on someone. But actually, what it's done is opened up different avenues where we can go and support, and that in itself has been really positive. So we will continue to push digital. It's really important. We will continue to look at where we can support customers who are vulnerable or who can't use digital or whatever that looks like, and to have opportunities of linking to those people in different ways as well, because of those people, we've got some people that don't want to come out of their homes. We've got some people that are happy to go to a community centre. So we're looking at that as a whole, if you like, which I think, Julian, comes back to your, what can we offer as a minimum? What's our, you know, not so much a basic service, but actually what's necessary for people. And I think
sorry, Julie, I'm glad we've run out of time. I'm so sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, please don't at all. It's been wonderful having you on board. I wish you the very, very best of luck in the election.
Thank you.
The election closes next Wednesday at midnight.
It does, yeah.
So the
Yeah,
very,
very
very best of
excited.
luck. Hope it all goes well.
Thank you.
You know, I know we've got some really strong competition this year, but it's lovely having
Yeah.
somebody from the Midlands come in and you know, showcase a different voice and showcase the work that is going on actually elsewhere in the country as well. So massive congratulations to you for getting the nomination, and the
Thank
best of
you.
luck with next week.
Thank you very
Obviously,
much.
if anybody wishes to follow up with you on any of the points today, what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Email is probably better. So it's Julie, Julie, .Haydon, Haydon, at wolverhamptonhomes.org.uk.
Fantastic. Well, the very best of luck. This recording will
Thank
go
you.
live, so please feel free, everybody, to share it far
Amazing.
and wide. But for now, Julie, thank you. Thank you to everyone who
Thank you.
joined us
Thank
today.
you all for listening, and I do appreciate the questions. Thank you.
All right, take care, everybody. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.